The cowboy rode into town just before sunset, dust clinging to his coat and weariness carved deep into his face. For years he had lived alone on his ranch, cooking his own meals, tending his wounds in silence, and speaking more to his horse than to another human being. Loneliness had become heavier than any saddle he carried. That evening, with no great hope and no dramatic intention, he nailed a simple notice outside the saloon. It read that he was looking for a maid, nothing more. Honest work, fair pay, a quiet life far from town gossip. He expected nothing unusual from it. Just another small attempt to make his days easier. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the dirt road, the saloon doors creaked open and shut, but no one came asking about the job. The cowboy finished his drink and rode back toward his ranch, convinced the notice would be ignored, like so many things in his life. When he reached his gate, he noticed a figure standing near the fence. It was a woman, still as the land itself, watching the horizon. She was Apache. Her presence was impossible to mistake, the way she stood tall, unafraid, as if the ground belonged to her. He slowed his horse, uneasy but curious. Strangers were rare, and Apache women even rarer. She turned to face him, her eyes steady and unreadable. There was no hesitation in her voice when she spoke. She said she had seen his notice in town. The cowboy nodded cautiously, already preparing to explain the work, the long days, and the rules of his ranch. He told her that if she was willing, she could start at dawn. There was nothing gentle or welcoming in his tone, only habit and distance. She shook her head once, slow and deliberate. She said she had not come to scrub floors or wash clothes. Her words landed heavier than a gunshot when she told him she had come to be his wife. For a moment the cowboy thought he had misheard. He laughed, short and sharp, expecting her to smile or correct herself. She did neither. Her face remained calm, certain, as if she had simply stated a fact written long before that day. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of dust and sage. The cowboy studied her, realizing she was not asking for permission, nor begging for shelter. There was purpose in her eyes, not desperation. In that instant, standing at the edge of his land, with a stranger who refused to be small, he felt the quiet order of his life crack. He had asked for help, for convenience, for silence. Instead, something far greater had arrived, and he did not yet understand that everything he believed about loneliness, choice, and fate was about to change forever. The night grew colder after her words, and the fire between them snapped softly, as if reacting to the tension. The cowboy did not answer right away. He had faced gunmen, storms, and hunger, but this was different. An Apache woman choosing him as a husband was not a simple matter. It was a danger wrapped in courage. He knew what the town would say, what the ranchers would whisper, and what the soldiers at the fort might do if they heard. Still, he asked the only question that made sense to him. He asked why she had chosen him. She did not look away. She told him that she had watched him in town before, seen how he spoke little but listened more, how he paid fairly and never joined in the cruel jokes about her people. She said he looked like a man who carried pain without turning it into hatred. Her tribe, she explained, was breaking apart under pressure from soldiers and hunger. A marriage had been arranged for her, one that would bind her to a man who saw her as property, not as a soul. She had refused, knowing refusal meant exile or death. Choosing the cowboy was not an escape from hardship. It was a choice of dignity. The cowboy felt the weight of her truth settle over him. He thought of the warnings he had heard all his life, stories meant to teach fear instead of understanding. He imagined waking each morning with eyes watching his land, waiting for a reason to burn it. He imagined bloodshed born from nothing more than love crossing an invisible line. Yet as he studied her, he realized she was not hiding from danger. She was walking straight into it, head high, willing to face the cost. He told her that marrying him would make her an enemy to many, that she would never be truly safe on his land. She answered that safety had never been promised to her, not as a woman and not as Apache. What mattered was choosing her own path, even if it led through fire. Her voice carried no bitterness, only resolve. That night, the cowboy lay awake in his cabin, staring at the ceiling as memories pressed in. He remembered years of emptiness, of meals eaten alone, of victories with no one to share them with. He had wanted a maid to ease his days, to keep his life unchanged, but more comfortable. Instead, fate had offered him a partnership that demanded courage, loyalty, and risk. When dawn began to lighten the sky, he understood that refusing her would be the easier path, but accepting her would be the truer one. And for the first time in a long while, he chose truth over fear, knowing that nothing ahead would be simple, and that his life would never return to the quiet loneliness he once believed he wanted. The days after their quiet union passed with an uneasy calm, the kind that settles before a storm. The cowboy went about his work with his rifle never far from reach, while she moved through the ranch as if she had always belonged there. She learned the rhythms of the land quickly, rising before dawn, reading the sky, and noticing things he had long ignored. At night they spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It carried understanding, shared vigilance, and an unspoken promise that neither would stand alone. Trouble announced itself in the distance one evening as a thin line of smoke curled against the horizon. By the time the sun dipped low, hoofbeats thundered toward the ranch, sharp and deliberate. Men rode in with faces hard and voices filled with hate, shouting insults meant to wound as much as threaten. They circled the land, firing into the air, testing how far fear would carry them. The cowboy stepped forward, jaw tight, every instinct urging him to answer violence with violence. His hand tightened around his rifle, ready to defend what was his. She stopped him with a touch, firm and calm. Her eyes scanned the riders, counting, measuring, remembering. This kind of danger was not new to her. She knew how men like these moved, how they relied on intimidation more than courage. She whispered that standing still was not surrender, that survival often came from patience and precision. Trusting her felt like stepping into darkness, but he did it anyway. When the riders dismounted to set fire to a shed near the fence, she moved swiftly, guiding him through the land as if it were a living map. They worked together, not as protector and protected, but as equals bound by necessity. Shots rang out, sharp and final, not wasted. The night filled with smoke and shouting until confusion overtook cruelty. The men fled, leaving scorched earth and silence behind them. As dawn broke, the ranch still stood, scarred but breathing. The cowboy looked at the woman beside him, her face marked with soot and resolve. He understood then how wrong his assumptions had been. He had believed strength meant standing alone, that protection flowed in only one direction. But she had brought knowledge shaped by loss and endurance, a kind of wisdom forged through survival rather than conquest. Later, as they watched the sun rise over the wounded land, he realized he had not taken a wife to save her from the world. He had taken a partner who understood it far better than he ever had. The danger had not broken them. It had bound them tighter, reshaping his idea of courage, and teaching him that true strength was not domination, but shared resistance against a world that wanted them apart. Time moved differently after the violence, slower and more deliberate, as if the land itself was learning how to breathe again. The burned wood was cleared, fences rebuilt, and the ranch slowly returned to life. The cowboy noticed changes, not only in the soil and the sky, but in himself. He no longer woke to silence that pressed on his chest. Mornings began with shared glances, small routines, and the comfort of knowing someone stood with him, not out of need, but by choice. The town took longer to change. People watched from a distance when he rode in with his wife beside him. Some faces carried suspicion, others curiosity, and a few showed quiet respect. There were no apologies, but there was less hostility. The cowboy did not lower his eyes, and she did not hide hers. Together, they moved through the world with a calm defiance that needed no words. Slowly, the rumors lost their power, worn down by the simple fact that the ranch still stood and no curse had followed them. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and ash, the cowboy finally spoke the question that had lived in him since the day she arrived. He asked her if she regretted choosing him, choosing a life that carried constant risk and endless watchfulness. She listened, then placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. She told him she had never chosen safety in her life, only honesty. She said a quiet lie was more dangerous than open struggle, and that with him, her spirit did not have to bend. Her words settled into him like roots finding water. He realized that everything he once wanted had been small because his world had been small. He had believed survival was enough, that keeping pain at a distance was the same as living. She had shown him that sharing the burden did not weaken a man, it expanded him. Love, he learned, was not a shield from hardship, but a reason to face it without turning away. As seasons changed, the ranch became more than land and labor. It became a place of balance, where two histories met without erasing one another. He had asked for a maid to make his life easier. Fate had answered with a woman who challenged him, protected him, and taught him how to belong. Standing together under the open sky, he understood that the moment she said she came to be his wife, the course of his life had shifted. Nothing was taken from him. Everything was given, and everything had changed.